Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Bill Arnold, the Assistant Vice President of the Purdue Research Foundation and Managing Director at the Purdue Foundry. Thanks so much for joining us today as we talk about venture studios as a way to pursue a startup. I've got several guests with me, and we're going to let them all introduce themselves in just a second. I want to give a shout out to the John Martinson Entrepreneurship Center at the College of Engineering, who is our co-sponsor for this with the Purdue Foundry. And thanks so much to them for all the things that they're doing on campus to promote entrepreneurship, as well as all the other pieces of the ecosystem. A couple of logistics items. The Q&A is open. If you have questions that you'd like to be able to put it, to the panelists, feel free to type them in there, and I'll be picking them up and passing them along to the panelists as we go. So let's dive in, shall we? So traditionally, right, startups, some entrepreneur comes up with an idea, they want to build a thing, they find some customers who are willing to buy it, and next thing you know, they've got $1 billion company, right? It's simple, it's straightforward, and realistically, it's hard as can possibly be, right? But at the Foundry, right, we sort of participate in sort of some traditional methodology. We expect people are already interested in doing a thing. They already have an idea. They often already have an invention that they bring to us and say, we want to commercialize this. Help us understand how to go forward. And so the Foundry's role is to sort of do some basic entrepreneurship training and commercialization training and help people embrace them wherever they are and sort of bring them along on the path. But that's not the only way that startups can happen. Right? They can happen in a lot of different ways. And the way that we're talking about today is through a relatively new model called the Venture Studio. And so we wanted to bring these folks together to explain sort of what they do so that you'd be aware of a different path that you might take or that your technology might take to get to market. So I have three guests with me. And I'm going to start just in the order that they are on my screen. And so, Tim, I'm afraid you're in the upper left-hand corner. So I'd like to introduce Tim Dixon. Tim, tell us a little bit about you and about what Dial does.
Sure. So, yeah, so I kind of 20 to 30 years, I won't say exactly. My background running Fortune 500 divisions, also a number of startups, East and West Coast. Latest startup before coming to Dial was a fiber optic startup in Chicago area. And my background generally is in datacom, high-speed transmission, telecom, and optics. So coming to Dial, I had kind of a stint where I was doing some consulting around C-suite selection for private equity and venture firms to help them put together leadership teams. And then was introduced to Dial by someone at Purdue in the data mine and saw this as a great opportunity. So Dial stands for Digital Innovation and Agri-Food Systems Lab. So that's, Purdue likes acronyms, and so we adopted Dial. And as a venture studio, we focus on driving innovation that benefits the agri-food systems industry. So we don't have a lot of constraints, but one of them is that as we launch a company, it has to be focused on agri-food systems. And really, that's a great thing. I mean, I found it as a superb opportunity because we're focused on some of the world's biggest problems around food scarcity, food safety, environment, those bigger issues that we can address through an industry that generally has been a little bit behind the curve in terms of innovation. So we want to ramp that up.
Cool. Thanks, Tim. There are several points that you raised that I want to come back to later, but welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Audrey, you're up next. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, Audrey Beckman. My background is mechanical engineering, and I went on to get an MBA. I spent 30 years in the orthopedic implant industry with Zimmer up in Warsaw, Indiana. So I was doing design work initially, and then leading product development functions in various sizes, and then had a number of other executive roles. So I started in the corporate world, started angel investing in 2012 with Vision Tech based in Indianapolis, and have built a portfolio of over 20 companies now through Vision Tech and a couple on my own. So that's kind of what got me into startup land, and but with the focus still on medical devices and medical technologies. So when Boomerang started up a couple of years ago, the founders included me and the founding team, and our focus is to transform lives by bringing new healthcare ideas to life. So that's our sweet spot, and all of us have had a passion for the medical space for our entire careers. And we're excited to continue that with startups, and mostly in the state of Indiana, but the Midwest.
Great. Hey, thanks a lot, Audrey. That's a really nice introduction. Bryan, tell us a little bit about you and Atua.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me, and thanks, Audrey and Tim, for your introductions. I just really quickly started my career in the computer space in the 90s. Companies like Novell, US Robotics, 3Com, iOmega. Started my own company twice in that space and exited. Decided after I'd had enough of tech for a while and went and got a PhD on top of an MBA and did some education, then went taught for 11 years as an economist at Michigan State, which I really enjoyed the Big Ten and enjoyed teaching. I started to get back into deep tech and deep tech commercialization, a lot of what you do, Bill, but I did it for Michigan State and then went to the University of Utah and then went to the University of Notre Dame. And over those three universities, started about 400 companies and all in deep tech. So, you know, this whole idea about how do you de-risk technologies, and spent a lot of time thinking about that process and building out that process. Recently have made a change and have taken on a partnership opportunity at Atua Partners where we focus on this deep tech component, and I'm sure I'll have an opportunity in the future to tell you a little bit more about how we do that. But that idea about how we incrementally add value through milestones to technologies and build those out. So glad to be here and glad to be a part of the panel.
Super. Thanks a lot, Bryan, and thanks for joining us. So for all three of you, I'm really, really excited to have conversation over the next, hour and 15 minutes or so, and then see what kind of questions show up. As a person who does not manage or run a venture studio, let me just say what I think a venture studio does, and then I'd love it if you'd all correct me. Hopefully I won't be badly wrong, but it seems like there's a different flavor to each of the ways that you operate, right? And so maybe you can help me tune that a little bit, right? So when I think about, as I described earlier, an entrepreneur and an invention show up together and say, I want to start a company and I want to do this thing. When I think about that in relation to a venture studio, when I hear Tim say, we're solving problems, right? We're starting with a problem and we're going to design a solution and find a person to run it, right? That's really how I think about venture studios in general. I think, okay, they're identifying problems, they're finding solutions to problems. Tell me, sort of on a continuum, are you looking more to start on the problem end or more on the solution end? And how, maybe this is a follow-up question. The follow-up question might be, how does an inventor fit in to that sort of just, with the idea that, a lot of our participants or viewers today are probably folks who are in, say, the College of Engineering. They're making things, they're inventing things. How do they play sort of with your particular venture studio? Does that seem like a fair set of questions? And maybe I'm going to go backwards this time. I'll start with Bryan and we'll go that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate us trying to put some definition around venture studio. It's funny because people come in, they're like, oh, are you an incubator? Oh, you're an accelerator. Oh, you're a venture studio. And oh, what's the difference? And so if I could just really quickly, Bill, I'll just tell you what I think the difference is really fast. Incubators were really about putting a lot of different companies together in the same space and having them kind of work together. Accelerators were about people with connections who had done it before, kind of connecting you to all the right people and all the right players. Venture studios are about doing the work with you. It's about getting in the trenches and figuring out how to solve the next milestone with you as part of that. So you're kind of an extension of the company, which really gives there a multiplier effect for that early de-risking exercise. So in that sense, any entrepreneur who shows up and says, hey, I've got an idea and I want to work with somebody to figure out how to get to the next milestone would be a great candidate for a venture studio. Some venture studios may source their deal flow from opportunities, some may source them from the technologies, but in any event, they've got to de-risk through next milestones. That, for me, is the real key. And then they're like, okay, well, how do you help me do that? That's about rolling up your sleeves and getting dirty with the entrepreneur to figure that out and find the answer, not just connecting them with someone else who would do that work. So whether you're helping them with development work or team building or unit economics or whatever the case might be, you're helping them get past the next hurdle, the next milestone to make progress in their business.
That's great. That's a super definition. I really like that. Hey, Audrey, you want to tell us about how Boomerang thinks about that?
Sure, thanks. And thanks, Brian, for the venture studio definition. I think that's a great way to describe it. When shorthand, I sometimes say it's an incubator or accelerator on steroids. Yeah, so in terms of where do we start? Generally, it does start with, an inventor and an idea, and that inventor may have some applications in mind, might have some preferred applications in mind. And then through collaboration and partnership with the studio, we may hone in on other applications, other key problems that need solving and that the idea or invention might be well suited to fix. So we start with a number of problem areas. So our narrow focus on healthcare innovations, but then within healthcare, because it's such a big field, we have some key areas of interest that are, based largely on what are the biggest problems that need solved. And, today with an aging population, chronic health issues, the need for more remote opportunities for quality healthcare, value-based care. There are any number of drivers and trends that are influencing innovations and which innovations are turning into successful companies. So we kind of focus in certain areas based on what we see the key trends to be. And through partnership with the founder, hone in on what the specific application would be best.
Yeah, okay. That's great. That's really helpful. And I see some variation between you and Brian and kind of where you're headed. Tim, tell us about how Dial sort of approaches this, because I think your take on this is a little different.
We're a little different. So if an entrepreneur shows up with an idea, we have a number of partners that we'll send them to, accelerators that can help them. One of our tenets is open innovation. So basically, we want to kind of scour the problem space every 6 months. So we go through 6-month cycles. We basically are clearing the slate, so to speak, and taking a fresh look at what the problems are in the industry and what are the jobs to be done by our customers in the industry. And so in many cases, what we're going to be doing is asking a lot of questions. We certainly aren't, although we have a lot of industry background, we're not the experts, and we want to get people in the room that are much smarter than us, work with them, some partners like EY and others to go through ideation and needs analysis phases. And so we really want to look at kind of the very best idea for the next set of launches that we're going to do within our studio.
Yeah, so that's great. So one of the things that I heard very clearly there is, right, because he started with it, is entrepreneur shows up with a solid idea that they want to do something with. They're really not a great candidate for Dial.
Yeah, I mean, look, I did a number of startups, and all of them were built around ideas, right? That were already there, and that's one methodology. That's just not our methodology.
Yeah.
And in fact, to the extent that we can, again, we don't ignore process, like Bryan said. I mean, kind of the stage gates and getting through that, that's all around de-risking. And so we just started at maybe a different point at the very beginning. That's kind of, again, really focused on as much innovation as we can do in every cycle.
Yeah. So Bryan and Audrey, and either one of you can jump on this first, I don't care. Entrepreneur with a solid idea comes to you. How do they fit in? How engaged do you want the inventor / entrepreneur to be that came with the invention? Do you want them like all in? Or, when we're dealing with them at the Foundry, right, they're like, I want to do a startup. That's not necessarily always the best answer to say, yes, you should do a startup, but it's often the answer that we end up giving them. Anyway, but when they come to you, how engaged do you want them to be in your sort of standardized process, your methodology? Do you want them to be all in, partly in, give you the idea and walk away and, be a scientific advisor? How do you have a preferred methodology, way that they engage with you?
Go ahead, Audrey.
Thanks, Bryan. Yeah, most of our founders have day jobs. And part of the reason they come to the studio is because they can't or aren't interested in doing it themselves. They've got something else important going on in their life, and, a career or a medical practice or whatever the professorship, whatever the case may be. And so part of the reason they come to a studio to partner and to see their idea come to fruition is because they can't be all in, or they don't want to be all in. Yeah. So, but we do want them to be engaged. A big part of what we do in the early stages, like Bryan and Tim both said, is de-risking. And so building on the knowledge that founder has developed, and that many of them have, quite deep knowledge and understanding of the market area that they've proposed. And so that's very valuable for us and can yield a really strong collaboration. And then later in the process, once a new company is formed, we ask them what role they want to have. And so together we develop what is the right start for the new company when it's time to start the new company.
Yeah, we're very similar to what Audrey said. I think that she said some really important things. One is, what does the inventor want? But also, what are they capable of doing, right? I mean, a lot of times if the inventor does want to be involved, they want to be the CEO. And only about, I'd say, a quarter of the time are they really, prepared to be the CEO. So sometimes you have to have a hard conversation with them. Yeah, I want you involved, but you really ought to be the CTO or the CSO or something else. And it's also true that we get a lot of times an inventor who is in an environment that can see the application, and they're actually positioned to help it be successful, but they also don't want to be the CEO or engaged in the company. They just know that it would be a great idea, and they'd like to be an equity holder or a founder, but they don't want to really be in the operation. So I think if you figure out kind of where their heads are, then you can kind of get them in the right spot, in the right place to help the venture be successful. But you can't, it's also never works to have them drop it off at your doorstep and walk away. That almost never works either.
Yeah, I would have to concur with that. And honestly, most of the people I deal with, I want them to keep their day jobs, producing things out of Purdue, so that we can do more startups around them. So one of the things, yeah, Tim, go ahead.
So again, I think we're a little different here. So again, process is part of the innovation and also the de-risking, but we also think people, learned 20 years ago, the success is around the people. And so our view is not to kind of build the team afterwards, but build the team to begin with. So we have a fellowship where we bring in a cohort of 6 or 7 folks every 6 months. And those are very targeted, entrepreneurial focused folks. They could be experienced entrepreneurs, they could be aspiring entrepreneurs, but they fit a particular profile that we measure for, and we go through a series of evaluations. So we want high-performing individuals at the very beginning of the problem set so that they understand the problem from day one. They don't get derailed by, bringing a CEO in later. And they work with our corporate partners to develop the solutions. And during that phase, what happens is there's an emotional attachment. They become passionate around the problems that they're solving with their partners. And so naturally, they become leaders. So we're really focused on developing these fellows in the fellowship program into founders. And we add, certain startup-oriented mini MBAs that might be needed in particular areas for them. Or we do innovation training that they need so that they can excel as they launch their new companies. So we really commit to them. I mean, we pay them, they're on staff. We want them 100% of their time, 110% maybe, as they go through the development phase. And then finally, we'll get into the funding and the business build part later.
Yeah. Hey, that's really great. And it's actually where I was headed with my next question, was because I thought, so Dial runs this cohort-based methodology, but I don't really have as much familiarity with exactly how Boomerang and Atua process things. So tell me a little bit about just sort of, let's call it deal flow, right? How are you structured to bring in? I'm thinking in terms of Tim's methodology sounds an awful lot like High Alpha's methodology to me, in terms of bringing a bunch of ideas, winnow them down, figure out what you're going to take to market. It sounds to me like maybe Atua and Boomerang are working on a more individualized basis. So can you just sort of tell me what engagement looks like from that perspective? Maybe even just how many founders or ideas are you working with on a quarterly or semi-annual basis? And is there any sort of cadence to that? Or is it really just, when it's the right time?
Go ahead, Audrey.
Thanks, Brian.
He's going to do that every time, Audrey.
I think you will. Yeah, I might have to beat him to it one time. Yeah, I would say in terms of the number in a quarter, let's say 5 is probably the sweet spot right now, but could be up to 10, especially at the early stages. And if we're probably at any given time have 5 to 10 ideas on the list that we're vetting, and in terms of what is going to move into the studio. So we do have a vetting that we do prior to taking it into the studio. So the way that we develop that is through partnerships with universities like Purdue, IU, Notre Dame, others in the Midwest as well. So we're branching out beyond Indiana. Healthcare systems, clinicians, a number of clinicians were our early founders coming to us with their ideas. So those are always great connections, and they tend to be really practical because these are people who are dealing, trying to solve a problem they deal with and see every day. And so those tend to be really interesting and very realistic in terms of where they're coming from and where they're headed. Also, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? It's out there. We all play in it. It's a world of networks and connections, and it's always fun to meet new people. Yeah, so those 3 sources primarily, but we also run campaigns on LinkedIn and through our own personal networks. So that's where most of our ideas come from. And again, I would say 5 to 10 at a time are kind of on our radar at various stages. So at this point, we have 1 NUCO, we have 2 or 3 projects in stages 1 and 2 of our 5-stage process, and then we have 15 on a list of ideas.
Okay, yeah. And so, but not, to be clear, right? They're not like all grouped into like phase 1 at one time and then.
Right, they're moving at their own, they're moving at their own pace, and they're meeting their, the deliverables for every stage and coming to a decision at the end of a stage, and we do those stage reviews individually.
Cool. Hey, Bryan, what about you?
Yeah, I think, if you think about Tim as kind of similar to YC or Techstars with the cohorts, we're also more like Audrey. We don't have a cohort. We source through university technologies, but also through entrepreneurs directly. And we have some core competencies of our de-risking that we add. So we have in-house software development, for example. Most projects require some amount of software development. So that's an area of expertise that we bring to the project. And so we're working with roughly 20 companies right now, but like Audrey, they're all at different stages. We're kind of moving along, and that's about what we can do. We have 4 partners. We sit on the boards. We evaluate, but also helping them through with our other connection points. That's about what our capacity is. So and they move through stages, right? So as they move through these final stages of scale and raising venture funding, then we typically will step back. We'll be a board member early, but then step off later, maybe observe, but then let it run and just stay whole in terms of the investment philosophy. So yeah, the channel really from universities to, we're also finding that word gets out, right? When you've had 2 or 3 successful exits, other entrepreneurs want to work with you, and they see what you've done, and we have an intake criteria, much I'm sure like Audrey's, in terms of what we think we'd like to work with, and then we bring them in and put them through that process and help them as we go. But yeah, about 20 that we're working with now.
Cool. So one of the things that, so Tim is very clear about agri-food business. Did I get all the right pieces to that? Agri-food.
Good, close enough.
Anyway,
that's
the
industry,
agricultural space.
Yeah.
The agricultural space. And Audrey, I heard you say something about orthopedics, right? And maybe that's sort of a special focus area for Boomerang at large. If not, can you sort of expand for me exactly sort of like, what is the sort of priority pipeline for you? Like 2 things come to you and you're going to, Bryan, you're like, we can do this many deals. Well, if you get 2 and you only have slots for 1, how are you going to prioritize which one? How do you make those decisions about what things you want to pursue? Bryan, you go first.
Yeah. Audrey, you sure you don't want to go first? Yeah, it's this is a little bit tricky because they almost never present themselves at the same exact moment, right? It's not like oftentimes you've got 2 or 3 at the exact moment to decide among. It's like, oh, I've got 1 to choose from, and then a week later, after you've already chosen that one, you've got another one, and so you tend to end up being like, dang, I wish I'd had that one at a different time. But again, there are some basic entry-level criteria that we have to have. Like in our case, either we're going to build the team, and if we're going to build the team, then the technology has to be to a certain point. If they've got the team, then we're willing to work with the technology. So there are different criteria that we're looking at, but they've got to hit that, or otherwise we're not going to let them in. But we found that this is a challenge because there's a deal that we'd love to do and we just don't have the bandwidth to do it. But that's usually the problem. It's not that we're waiting around for something to do and nothing's coming in the door. It's usually we've got too much to do and we have to say no to some really promising things.
Mm-hmm. But that's not based, what I'm hearing is that's not really based on sort of the domain area. It's more around the other pieces and how they fit together.
Well, we definitely are deep tech venture studio. So in other words, we want to make sure that there is differentiating intellectual property in this. So for us, there needs to be something, whether we're doing machine learning or AI or blockchain or something in the software stack that is a little bit beyond just writing an app, right? So for us, the technology does matter. We want to make sure that there is a differentiator, a moat around the technology itself as a criteria.
Great, that's a great distinction. Okay, Audrey, now it's your turn.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so orthopedics just happens to be my background, but the rest of the founders have different backgrounds. So we're not focused on orthopedics, not by a long shot. So we're general healthcare, and our areas of interest will depend upon what's going on in the healthcare area. But right now, chronic diseases, more and better opportunities for connected health, digital health applications that improve the quality of care when the patient and the practitioner are not in the same room or healthcare facility. So those are kind of two of our big areas right now. But, you know, for 20, 30 years now, the US government has been trying to, you know, push along and promote value-based care, which means higher quality, less cost. And so that drives a whole nother set of innovations for hospital administrators and practitioners, as well as patients, you know. So, so we don't have a specialty, so to speak, within healthcare where we would take all comers. And then, you know, like Bryan said, we have certain filtering criteria that we use, and we use kind of a 15 topic risk assessment for our initial vetting of the ideas. And sure, market size is going to play into it. Number of patients affected by a particular condition is going to play into it. The number of practitioners or number of hospitals that treat the particular condition. There, you know, there can be all kinds of different ways to look at the market in the healthcare area. Another kind of important criteria for us is we're not into pharmaceuticals. So pharmaceuticals have a long track to get through before they can get to market. And that doesn't really fit with the venture studio model. You know, there's not a quick exit there usually. So, so we stay out of pharmaceuticals, we stay out of class 3 devices and software solutions, but we really love software and device combined, and we love software solutions. So connected health is definitely a big part of our focus.
Cool. Tim, do you want to add any flavor around my broad swath?
Well, yeah. So your comment on industry focus, actually, we really doubled down on that. Again, one of our differentiators, we hope, is our strong industry connection, hundreds and hundreds through Purdue and another set of hundreds through our partners. And so we really like to, I mean, we're engaging on the ideation phase. We're looking to those corporate partners that work us on ideation to do field trials. We want them to do the prototyping with us. We want them to be the first sales avenue for us, first revenue. And frankly, we'd like to see them be potential exits for us. So part of de-risking the whole venture studio model is, you know, also, can you secure revenue and secure an exit? So we're using our industry expertise to build that ecosystem so that our founders and the companies that we launch through the studio have a greater chance of a successful exit because of those corporate partnerships.
Great, that's fantastic. Let me. So one of the things when I think about all of your programming, or not programming, all of your methodologies, right? You all, from my perspective, one of the great strengths that you have is the teams that you have, not the teams that you're building. That's a strength as well, but the teams that you have, right, within your organization that are, from my perspective, what a venture studio really brings is, look, we've got all this experience and we've got all these, you know, Bryan says, we got our own software team. We're building whatever the software is, right? I think about shared accounting systems and marketing people and all the back office stuff that has to happen and all of that. And again, so Dial's method is a little different, where they're building this group of fellows who are kind of going through the ideation process. But my guess is they're also going to stand up some shared services in the back end of that that'll help those companies to be more successful. So, so I see that as a super strength that venture studios have. But I do. How often do you end up having to? And I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Bryan. How often do you have to build the team? Or how often does sort of a team come, right? And just as a foreshadowing, so you guys can start to think about this, eventually I'm going to start down a path of like, how is value created and captured, and what's in it for the venture studio? Like, how does that work? But when we get to that point, I don't want to get lost in the weeds of like, this person gets 2% of the equity and this person gets, we're not going to go to that level. So just to be clear. But anyway, back to the question about teams, right? The teams that you're building. Can we talk about that? Tim, you want to go first?
Yeah, so, and maybe we should have brought this in to begin with on the venture studio side, right? I mean, one of the advantages of a venture studio is that you have kind of a bolt-on for all the components that it takes to get a business built and get a product to market. I mean, we want our founders only focused on, am I building the right product? And I'm driving to first sale, right? And so all the marketing, all the software engineering, all the product design folks, all that are part of the package of building the company. I mean, again, I've done it the other way, right? I mean, this is almost like everything's on a silver platter for the people that we bring in. And we want it to be that way because we want to make it easy for them, both in the terms of the way we innovate, how we define the process, et cetera. Now, we're a small team and we focus on everything from ideation, prototyping, and then we do the pre-seed funding ourselves. So we provide the financing also. But then we hand off to a partner, you mentioned them already, High Alpha in Indianapolis, and they are our business build partner. They're really focused on taking that company kind of to the next phase where we drive to sales and then get seed funding. So so that component is always has to be there in my mind for a venture studio. So I mean, that's the big advantage to having those business resources available. Now, ultimately, when they come off of kind of the shared resource model, they're going to have to build their own company capabilities, hire people. We help train them in doing so and selecting teams and all that. But it's all part of a process after they get to market and get to first sales.
Thanks, Tim. Audrey, you want to jump in here?
At least that's our view.
Well, I would say we have some similarities to what Tim just described. So the Boomerang team is active, very active in the first couple stages and the initial vetting. So the combination of the Boomerang team, including the XIRs, which is what we call, sometimes they're called EIRs, we call them executives in residence. So the combined team is active during the vetting stages 1 and 2, and then the new company is formed and you need a CEO. Now, maybe the XIR becomes the CEO, the XIR who was leading the project. Maybe somebody from the founding team becomes a CEO, but often you're going to go outside to find a CEO that has a particular, good fit for that particular business. So you're always building a team. Bill, to your point, you're just constantly looking for people who you think have the right experience from a startup perspective, the right leadership skills, the right technical experience in some cases. So you're constantly building the network and bringing people in, testing them out as XIRs, bringing them on as XIRs, and preparing them to be CEOs when the time comes.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that in this sense, we're all very similar. As Tim was talking, I was like, yep, that's what we do. I mean, that's, you bring in, usually we'll get a team of 1 or 2 or maybe 3 founders. They got a great idea, great technology. We're going to help them build that out. And we're going to wrap all of these services around that. So, we've got legal and accounting and design and marketing and lead gen and all of these things that we know how to do, which, if we can hit milestones, then we just plug those in at the right time as they go along. And as they hit the milestones, they then start to build out their teams and replace those groups and those people. Usually the first hire they'll make is a salesperson, usually. And then, they might, now because we're supplying so much of the dev talent, sometimes companies would initially hire dev talent, but we can postpone that a little ways because we have so much of it in-house. But again, there's no reason to have to go out and spend time looking to find legal. We've got that all wrapped up and we got all the docs. We know how to do it. We help them do it. So those kinds of things just make it quick and easy. It just makes it so much easier. As Tim said, I found I wish I'd have had it.
Exactly.
As a founder, it just makes it so easy. And then they kind of can build out organically as you go forward. But yeah, I found myself saying yep to everything Audrey and Tim were saying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So,
Oh, by the way, one last comment real quick. It is true that the venture studio, by definition, is in those early stages. It's going to phase out as the company starts to build out and build its capacity. That's the very point. Is Tim's handing it off to, let's say, High Alpha. We also have internal funding for those first few stages, but we're immediately going to help them go out and raise a seed round with institutional investors or an A round. And then you're going to get different people on your board and different advisors in your network and all these different things. So they're going to grow past you fairly quickly if they're successful.
great. That is a super segue into that part I was talking about sort of the what's in it for the venture studio, right? And this is actually a question that came out of the Q&A, but it just seems like this is the right place to plug it in, which is that sort of, so as you said, you're active in the first couple of stages, and Audrey, you said the same thing, Tim as well, right? So active at the beginning, you're investing human resources and development resources and all of your expertise and experience and your internal team towards getting this company to a certain point. And then, as Bryan mentioned, right, maybe you become a little less involved as they sort of, stop crawling and start walking, and eventually they run. So two questions here. One is, what do you think is the right or the desired, and maybe that's more important, the desired time frame from when they start with you to when they're done with you? Like, what is your exit timeline? What are you looking for, right? Audrey said, I don't want to be in pharmaceuticals because they take too long, right? And I know that I'm familiar with Dial having said clearly many times that they're looking for exits in a relatively short period of time in conversations I've had with Tim previously. So just what does that time frame look like? And what is it in terms of financial return that the venture studios are sort of targeting as sort of, what's worthwhile to you?
Well, there's
I'm going to make Bryan go first.
Yeah, make me go first.
Yeah, Bryan, if you'll just talk from now until
I would rather him go
5:50.
first.
Yeah, there's a lot in that to unpack. So let me say that.
Wait. I'll be fair. All right, let's be fair. We'll do one at a time, right? So one thing at a time. The first one is this question of how long do you expect to get to exit? We'll start there.
Yeah. So in our part, because we do deep tech and we start early, we're very much like a seed investment fund from a timing standpoint. We're a 10 to 12 year horizon. So and we're looking for literally, unicorn kinds of exits after that period of time. But it's gonna take 10 to 12 years for us to do that. Yeah.
Okay, and you're based on a scientific discovery or an engineering breakthrough, basically.
Yeah, and even in software, if you're talking AI, deep tech, blockchain, these are things that it takes time. It takes time to build these out, get them right, get product market fit, all of those things.
Okay, all right. Now I want to go to Audrey.
So we're at a shorter time horizon, more like 5 to 7 years, and smaller than the unicorn, but still, substantial. And in the healthcare field, a lot depends on payment models, reimbursement models. So there's a lot of things that are specific to healthcare that come into play to build that model. Yeah, so not quite the unicorn that Bryan mentioned, but hopefully more of them. Hopefully more of the applied science ideas.
A herd of baby unicorns.
That's right.
Okay, Tim.
Yeah, probably should have said, the digital part is software-oriented solutions. So, that whether SaaS or, some type of software solution. And so our time frame that we look at is like 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
Can I just make one little modification to my comment? We definitely are looking for unicorns, have had unicorns. I should say that the very model of a venture studio allows you to win at a much smaller exit size. So it's not like we're totally okay to lean in and get hit by a pitch too. Don't get me wrong. We don't have to hit a home run. We can get on base a number of ways and still have it work.
Yeah, I mean, for Dial, right, we're looking for singles and doubles, right? And that's, once you get seed and Series A, then they can take it from there. That's really not our area of interest.
Yeah. So Bryan, I think that's a really, really important point, and one that maybe we should explore a little more before we go on to anything else. And that is this idea that, at least what I heard from you, is I have a lot more control in what I'm doing, what I'm investing in, because I'm investing in me, in my team, and our experience and our expertise. And so I can make better bets. So I can afford to have them not be, I don't need everything to be 100x to deal with all the failures of other people's inability to deliver, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's
absolutely.
I think it's a huge differentiator from the traditional, I'm going to go pitch, 16 different places and maybe one person will take my call, right?
Yeah, no, this is a very different world. I appreciate you bringing this up, because unlike a venture fund, where they see tens of thousands of pitches and, then they fund 100 and, 1 out of 10 works and they're betting on that unicorn. Because we're working through milestones, we like to, I often say, we're kind of like a benevolent executioner. We're not picking winners, we're picking losers. It's like, as fast as you can, you're picking the one that's not going to work, and then you kill it, so, or pivot it. But the others, you're letting sort of organically do what they're going to do. You're not suggesting which ones will win or not win, but you're kind of going down that path. And so that, coupled with and I know you're going to get to this in a minute, but the actual value structure, the ownership structures, and the equity structures allow you to win at a much lower level, because more of them are going to win. You just weed them out faster and better.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that? I just wanted to make sure that.
I 100% agree with Bryan. He described it very well, right? It's like, you're reducing the risk, you're de-risking, and your chances of success are much greater, and your hit rate is much greater. And that's how it works out for a venture studio.
Yeah, I agree. And, you back out when it's the right time to back out, when they don't need you anymore. And they move from the training wheels to 2 wheels, Then after they stop wobbling, they're good.
Yeah, so you're now my 3 favorite people, because you're all interested in figuring out who are the losers, right? Let's stop putting resources into things that are not going anywhere, and so we can put our resources in people and places that are going someplace, right? So great. Sorry for that whole aside, but Bryan, you threw that pitch. I wanted to make sure we did something with it. So so we've got sort of a really. So on my screen, on the left-hand side, we're at 5 to 7 years. And on the right-hand side is Bryan, and he's maybe as long as 12 with his deep tech. But you all have described a methodology that really sort of goes through the first part and then brings in other VCs, right? So we got to a sort of a, what's the end point of the exit, right? But what about the handoff? What about the part where the companies are ready for introduction to other investors? What's maybe the time frame, either work backwards from the exit or work forwards from when they start working with you? What does that time frame look like before they're like ready for institutional funding that's not you?
I can go. I'll go. I mean, our model, we really want it to be somewhere in the 12 to 18 month period before that's kind of their seed round, right? And we pre-seed them for covering that kind of duration. And again, in the same way we look for corporate partners to initiate sales, we also have an industry focus around venture capital and investors. And so we continue to kind of sow the interest over time and get people connected as we launch our companies. So hopefully we have kind of a more direct line of sight to that first seed round investment for the companies that we launch.
Now I'm going to change things up here and go to Bryan now. I've been doing, boy, girl, boy this whole time, but we're going to go to Bryan now, and then I'm going to than
this is actually really interesting, because I think that for me, a venture studio is part founder, part investor. And we actually invest very early because we're investing also. What we'll do is we'll put a tranche of money into the company that they then use to pay our people to do development and to do other things in a captured kind of way, but very at cost, by the way, not inflated. So it's a good deal for them. But the point is that we then get on on their cap table as well. So we establish valuations, and we get on the cap table with investments. We then are able to really control how they use their money. So we're making sure they're using it well. And then we're also providing in kind that allows us to have some equity as well. But the idea there is that it makes them investable very quickly, because we have a set of investors in Atua Partners as well, who we then take the companies to very quickly to say, would you like to invest alongside Atua Partners? So almost all of our ventures will get outside funding within the first 6 months with outside investors. And then the cool part is that then those investors help take the company to the next set of investors, because they have connections and they have linkages and they want to stay whole and they know who the next lead ought to be. So it creates a really nice network effect around that investing environment.
That's great. Audrey?
Sounds like we're pretty similar to Bryan in terms of the investment track. So we try to get through the first couple stages and end up in about 6 months. I end up with a prototype, but not regulatory clearance. And in the medical space, regulatory clearance or a path to regulatory clearance is really important in terms of, well, first, you can't start selling until you have it. And second, you're probably not going to attract much investment until you can start to sell. So that becomes a really important time driver. And the timeline to regulatory clearance, meaning kind of the timeline for our stage 3, can be 2-3 years or more. It just depends on what the technology is and what the regulatory path is and what it takes to fulfill the regulatory requirements. So in the meantime, the studio provides funding for the first couple stages. We're going to try to, ensure freedom to operate, because we also think IP is really important. We've got to have sustainable competitive advantage. So in addition to utilizing studio resources and the business stack, the companies are going to get studio funding the first couple stages, and then funding from Boomerang Venture Fund in stage 3. And then there would be a match if there's external investment as well, up to 125. So the total Boomerang venture investment could up to stage 3 or through stage 3 could be 250. And then the outside investment becomes critical, and we're going to help them. We're going to help them approach investors if they need it. We're going to help connect them to investors and of all sizes through the rest of the life of the company.
Yeah, so there a little bit of characterization there, and because probably didn't mention it, but our pre-seed, it follows exactly the same time frame. We want to stand up a company at the 6-month point, right? And that's when they get the pre-seed funding. Pre-seed funding we look at is $500K to $750K typical for the pre-seed funding. And then the timing I gave you was, and I thought the question you were asking is, when do outside, kind of not friends and family of Dial, right? Independent outside investors come in, and that's the 12 to 18 months.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all fair. Fair game, right? And I appreciate that clarification. I think that's really good. It leads me to a question, actually, that is somewhat specific to Dial, and it has to do with your fellows, right? So you've got these fellows, and they're going through this ideation process. You're eventually coming up with an idea for a company that's going to go. What about the rest of the fellows who aren't going to end up being the person who goes and leads?
Yeah, for sure. So, there's different tracks that a fellow might take, right? They might become a founder at any position, in the founder spectrum, right? they also might not, right? And so we have that frank conversation with them beforehand and say, hey, look, we're paying you. There's 6 months of experience here. You're getting introduced to a new industry. You're working with a ton of smart people that, and you're making a ton of connections. I mean, we look at the fellows class that we have now, and even this morning, they're like, they could not believe the kind of introductions that they're getting and the kind of learning experience they get from subject matter experts. I mean, literally on almost a daily basis. So it's like, yeah, okay, you're spending 5 or 6 months, but is it lost or is it still of a huge value? And again, we have a curriculum built around startups. So even if someone, I mean, they're new, maybe they just graduated, but they're aspiring to be, and they're aspiring entrepreneur and they fit the profile. I mean, it's almost like they get educated in a new realm that they would have never been able to see if they went to some kind of corporate job.
Sure. Yeah.
And we call it the entrepreneurial MBA, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Learn by doing, right? Run into this wall a few times and you'll be ready.
Well, actually, that's the advantage of a venture studio. I think Bryan and Audrey could say, it's like, we've already run into the wall, right?
That's
Don't
right.
do it again, right? It's
Yeah.
like, we can help you get through this without all the, the bandages, right?
Right.
That's right.
Well
Learn
said.
through the experience of others.
Yeah.
Right.
Well said. Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So, all right, let's, again, I don't want to get way in the weeds on this, but the question is sort of, so now we've got time frames of sort of what the pieces look like on the large scale economics piece. But what, and you've all been very forthcoming about, your ability to, go for singles, doubles, lean in, get money another way. I love we've got baseball metaphors. Just, it's a good thing because we don't have actual baseball, but we have metaphors for it. So, but what, when you look for a return, and I'm going to actually twist this a little bit. When you look for a return outside of the economics of the return, what's the best thing that the studio gets out of standing up one of these companies and having it go forward? Audrey, I'm going to let you go.
Well, we're in healthcare, so we love to transform lives and make, improve the quality of care that's available to people. So that's the best thing that I think we get out of it, and that hopefully others get out of it.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, yeah. So this is a really big thing for Dial, right? I mean, Dial was established to drive innovation in agri-food. And so, in a place where we think it really needs to happen, and there needs to be a huge impact worldwide. So for us, that is a greater tenet than financial returns. We love to develop people. We want them to succeed. We want to, but at the end of the day, we want to change an industry. We need to change this industry, and we can do that through innovation. Successive innovations is going to get that done, in a better fashion than any other way. That's our feeling.
Super. Just as Bryan, before you say anything, Tim, does Dial have? Will you be anticipating any sort of overarching, like, we're looking for something to do this, that we can then build something to do this, that we can then build something to do this, that sort of successively builds that innovation, or is it more opportunistic than that?
Well, so
or market driven.
It's definitely market driven, right? But at the same time, I mean, if you apply innovation strategy, you're looking for clusters also, right? I mean, you're looking for connections and clusters. It might be sequences of your launches, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, there's enough of an ecosystem that you want to plug in to, kind of other startups and their kind of web. And so we look at that strategically also. And, how is that going to fit to benefit the whole agri-food system ecosystem?
Super. Thanks. Bryan, thanks for letting me jump on you. But okay, now it's you.
Well, I think that if you're looking at from a Atua Partners perspective and not for the greater social good, which we're also obviously always concerned about, but I think there are large network effects from doing this and doing it well, right? So if you create an environment that then builds on itself based on the abilities and the technological advantages that you bring, then what you do is, to Tim's point, you make it easier to do entrepreneurship, which is what creates jobs in an economy. It's what creates new technologies and innovations in an economy. It's what brings opportunities to economies. So if you look at this, and I mean, there's some really stunning statistics. If you look at new jobs created over the last 20 years, companies over 1,000 produced negative numbers of jobs, right? And small companies are where most of that happens. And if you think of innovations, a lot of those happen in small companies. So creating those environments to just make it easier, less painful, less brain damage, I think that's a really good outcome.
I couldn't agree with you more. So you've all talked about building teams, right? And one of the things I'll just say for all you viewers at home is that every venture studio that I've ever gone and looked at their website has a career section where they're like looking for people to join their companies, right? So just be aware that you can look these folks up and they probably have things that you could get involved in. Important piece of what we're doing here today. So but Tim, you spoke most directly to the idea that you have sort of a specific profile because you're selecting for this really specific fellows role, right? But I wonder if all three of you could kind of talk about sort of the profiles or hallmarks of the people that you recruit to be parts of your companies, kind of at the leadership role, right? I'm not, I don't care about who the initial CFO is. Sorry, all you CFOs out there. Nothing, nothing personal. It's just not where my focus is today. But maybe you could start, Tim, since I know that you have a specific, methodology that you.
Yeah, so we use a series of assessments that help us focus in on certain profiles and certain behavioral characteristics. And we look at a number of different dimensions. Effective is one dimension, which is typical personality. And also kind of rate that around kind of historically what successful C-level people have done and been. And it includes things like typical, you hear it, but do you really measure it? Goal orientation, perseverance, internal locus of control, right? I mean, these are important effective measures. We also look at cognitive measures, and it doesn't hurt you. It doesn't necessarily predict success, but cognitive ability gives you the bandwidth to take on more. And so it's not bad to have smart people in the room. And then the third thing that we look at specifically, not too many people look at it, but we look at the connotative realm. So really, in the terms of a C-level team, a lot of their success is built on instinct. And so connotative measures instinct, or it measures action modes kind of without thinking. And so we're looking at how they fit in terms of being under pressure and responding quickly and those kind of things. That's another important measure that we look at as we do kind of the profile and the fit. And then you kind of look at all those, and then you layer on top of each other, kind of build a chessboard on how a leadership team really should be kind of constructed. and you end up with a better performing leadership team by doing that. You know, that second step, that really comes as you start building out the teams and hiring people. That's a little bit farther on in the phase, the venture studio phase.
Thanks, Tim. Bryan?
Yeah, I'm always in awe of people like Tim who know the psychology well enough to pick people that way. We're again a little more agnostic and back to picking losers, where you know, we're going to quickly put out a milestone that we need to get to, and we're going to find out whether that person can get through the milestone or not. I mean, this is really kind of the scrappy, you know, gritty, willing to kind of do what it takes to get there, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time with people who aren't willing to get to that milestone or do what it takes to get there. So we're going to pile on people as much as we're going to pile on capital to those who win. And my opinion is that they reveal themselves pretty quickly. People who are willing to do that, apply themselves and win through milestones or pivot or change or figure it out. It's not that everything can be figured out. And you know, we're happy to bring as many smart people into the room as we can to help them figure it out. But we found that 90% of it is, you know, goal-oriented applications, focused, willing to work hard, and, you know, grind through stuff.
Audrey?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so we're using the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS. And through that process, you know, we've identified our core values and, you know, obviously try to hire people who abide by those and kind of put those top of mind. In addition to that, so that's kind of the personality side that Tim was talking about, the personal characteristic side. And then in addition to that, it's really about their experience. And so, you know, again, this healthcare space, there's some really unique aspects to it. So people with experience in medical devices or medical-based software, that's for sure a plus. People have had multiple kinds of roles, so lived in different functional areas within a company if they're coming from a more of a corporate background, or people, you know, who've led startups in the past in this area, and if so, did they have a successful exit, or what did they learn from whatever the end was for their company? So yeah, so we, you know, we like a breadth, we like diversity of experience, and we look to build out a team that should double in size from where we are today within the next year. And, you know, diversity is going to be really important for us so that we have people on hand we can tap for a variety of projects that, you know, that would be coming along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for each of you, just is there a role in your organization or in connection with the companies that you're helping to start, or somebody who thinks they want to be an entrepreneur? They're a first timer, right? They don't have any experience, and they just think maybe they're straight out of school, right? Because we have, again, we're co-sponsored by the College of Engineering and the John Martinson Entrepreneurship Center, which serves a lot of undergraduates in the College of Engineering, which is the biggest college at Purdue. Is there a path for folks coming out of, say, the College of Engineering to hook up with a venture studio and find a role that whets their appetite for, you know, eventually leading a startup?
Can I start?
I'll start on that one. If
Okay,
that's okay.
Start with Audrey. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So I had the pleasure to bring on board for Boomerang during COVID a number of interns. They all came from Notre Dame because that's where my connections were. Well, actually one came from IU, so a marketing one from IU, but 3 different engineering students from Notre Dame. And then we ended up hiring one of the engineering students after graduation, and she's our project engineer. So she does some of the project management, some of the early technical assessments, and it's been really fun to watch her grow as she's worked alongside a number of XIRs as well as the founder. So yes, there is. And, you know, the more projects you have going or the more companies you have going that are using that kind of resource, the more you're going to need.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Bryan?
I'd like.
I was going to let Bryan go next.
No, Tim, go ahead, man. I'm good at letting other people go ahead.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
This is important to me though. So yes, like Audrey, we also have interns on staff. They help us with a lot of the kind of the research and some of the tools that we're building internally to make Dial better. But maybe closer to your point, absolutely, we see this as a career path for some folks. I mean, our cohorts, we like the mix of experienced entrepreneurs and we select for that, but about a third of them, we want to be fresh. I mean, literally, I mean, they have to have an entrepreneur orientation. We're going to test for that. We want to see them have, you know, leanings towards starting a business if they haven't already. But as an example, one of the individuals in our cohort now, right? He graduated in December. He was like, I don't know, off the charts, 3.95 kind of, you know, GPA, and had offers in industrial engineering from Walmart, 2 consulting offers, one with Deloitte. I can't remember the other one. He turned those down. He's like, okay, look, how else am I going to have an opportunity like this? If I would go to Deloitte, I'd work for 2 or 3 years, and then I would look to try to do a startup. So it's like, why can't I just do it now, right? And again, we build a curriculum around what we want them to achieve and behave, and what a real startup success looks like. So we're helping them kind of, again, it's kind of a graduate course and how to succeed as a startup. And so we are very open to talking to recent grads.
As are we, and we've noticed that age, experience, it's not a great predictor of success. Actually.
That's right.
It's kind of funny because sometimes you'll get these, and I don't mean to badmouth XIRs or EIRs or anything else, but sometimes you get entrepreneurs who have been phenomenally successful the first time around, want to apply the exact same, you know, process to the next startup, and things have changed. Life's moved on, and it doesn't work the same anymore. And so their advice, their application, their you know, their the whole process they want to apply just doesn't really work anymore. So sometimes some of the best people you can have are people that are just thinking about this from a completely different way. We'd much rather select on the work ethic than on the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So this next question is a direct follow-on to that one. And it might be a little touchier, right? Purdue is known for having a very large foreign student population. Foreign students, I will attest, often show up at the Foundry wanting to start a company. There are limits to what they can and can't do in terms of the visas that they're subject to and those kind of things. So, and this is coming directly out of the Q&A, right? So this is an audience member question, right? But can folks who are here on, you know, as a foreign student, can they participate in some way in the venture studio process to help get a company started and be part of that? Maybe it may not even be something that any of you have dealt with, I don't know. But it is a pretty common subject around campus of, you know, what are the limits to what, they're not green card holders, they're literally F1 visas that are student visas that do put some pretty significant limits around that, what they can and can't do. But is there a path to a green card, to an H-1B? Is there a methodology? And if nobody's comfortable with this question, we can move on to another one, but I just wanted to see if anybody happened to have some insight into that. Brian? Yeah,
I'll answer that. And this is where I think universities are actually really interestingly positioned to help, but you can do this in venture studios as well. First of all, first generation foreign folks, immigrants, they tend to test very highly on the criteria and qualities that you want in an entrepreneur. They're usually very motivated, very hardworking, very willing to sacrifice, all of those things that really lead to success. It's also true that there is a path with successful, especially in the deep tech area that we spend our time in, to getting HB1 visas and to getting green cards, at least before maybe the last decade. The last decade's been a little tricky, but before that for sure. Although we continue to see it happening now as well. So I would encourage foreign nationals who want to start companies to do so. It's a great path forward. It's not a guaranteed path, but even if you're successful here at the company and not at staying, often you can take that back to the country from which you came and still be successful as an entrepreneur, which is good for the world's economy. So I think there's a place there and a way to move that forward. It is a little tricky at times, but it's certainly doable.
Cool. Either you want to add anything to that?
I would just add, we haven't dealt with that yet, being, a startup ourselves, 2 years in. So, but I would look forward to the opportunity to get into it.
So, yeah, and so we have it on the radar, sponsoring visas. At this point, we haven't come across that yet. I mean, it's not been kind of something that we've engaged on, but certainly not out of the question.
Sure. Okay. So now we've done this whole bit about team and students and all that. I want to go back to that whole piece about, like, there's a question here about how much equity does the venture studio sort of end up with, right? And so we talked about the exit and, sort of what kind of multiples and all those kind of things. But what's a, and I'll tell you that I don't think there's a right answer to any question about what's the right equity split. There is no right to that. It just is what it is. In every deal is different. That's my answer to that. But for you guys, right, sort of what is your expectation around sort of at the point when they get to exit? What do you sort of think your share of the company is going to be in terms of what percentage of it do you think that Atua is going to own, or Boomerang's going to own, or Dial's going to have a piece of? What's that look like?
So maybe that's the order you want us to go in, but
sure.
So from Atua's perspective, we again are a little bit agnostic as to that number. It depends a lot on how much effort goes into it. We see ourselves as we're less formulaic there because we've got two ways to be on the cap table. One is through the in-kind work of the actual venture studio, and the other is through the investing dollars that we put in. So we feel this is very much a relationship with the founder in terms of what the value is that we add, as well as what the right valuation of the company is for the investment. So here we differ dramatically from a YC or from a Techstars, where they're very much more formulaic, which is, hey, give us 6.5% of your company, you're in here for 90 days, we do all of this magic, and then you're out, and we're on your cap table. Instead, we say, look, you might be here for years, and we're going to do this much work, and we think the size of the project is this much capital, and if we're going to value our company at this amount, then that's what it would be worth on your cap table, and come to agreement where they agree to that, so that it doesn't get down the road and the inventor or the founder feels like they were taken advantage of in some way, that there's a real clear value proposition in terms of what we bring to the table, both in terms of cash, capital, and investment of time and effort.
Audrey?
So similar to Bryan, I would say there's no set number at the end, and there's also no set number at the beginning. So when I'm talking to people for the first time, I'll say, okay, typically venture studios take initial equity of 30 to 80%. Well, that's a big range, right? So the answer is it depends. It depends on, is there IP? What's the strength of the IP? How much work is done? Do you have a functioning prototype? Do you have a three-dimensional model or a 3D printed thing? What's the level of sophistication and development of this idea and solution? And as well, do they have a really strong handle on the market, or do they have kind of a weak handle on the market? Do we need to totally revamp the business model? Do they even have a business model? So there's just all kinds of aspects of it depends. And then, of course, that's the starting place. And then where do you end up depends upon how much investment comes in, when it comes in, what the terms are. Yeah, so like Bryan indicated, we would expect to be on the cap table in a couple different ways. And initially, most likely, we're going to have majority equity, but that changes as other investment comes in.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't familiar with venture studios before, although I've raised millions, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on the other side. I was shocked, as Audrey just stated, the wide breadth of, well, I think Y Combinator is now up to 12% instead of 7, but 12 to 80, right? I mean, literally, that's the range. We're definitely right in the middle, right? I mean, we want to be fair to the founders, so they probably come in the 45-50% range, right, for the founding team. And so it could be as low as 40. It depends on if they have IP that we need to kind of pay out on, right? It just depends on that particular relationship. But again, that hasn't really been a problem, because once they look at the support that they get for many years, and how kind of the process works. And again, we're hiring very experienced entrepreneurs that have done it many times, and they're like, yeah, I'll do it. Why not? I mean, that's a great path for me. Even though the equity, it might be a little bit higher than they would do with a venture firm on their own.
Thanks. That's insightful from all of you. Sometimes I think it doesn't really matter what the answer is as much as it matters hearing you talk about how you think about the answer, right? I think that's helpful for people to hear. I think that the next thing I'd like to sort of explore is actually sort of retrospectively, right? So once upon a time in this broadcast, I said something like, you're my 3 favorite people because you want to stop doing things and put resources in the right place. But that brings me to this question about what does it look like when you tell somebody you're going to stop doing their thing? What does it look like to kill a company in the venture studio model? Because, when I have to do it, it's with an entrepreneur who is wedded to the idea and the tech or whatever it is, and they're just holding onto it for dear life, and it may not, there's no market for it, or nobody wants to pay for it, or whatever. And so breaking that news is sometimes difficult. But in the venture studio, you're dealing with it differently. So I guess 2 pieces to this. One is, what does that look like? And it's not because I just am looking for gore. That's not the idea here. But I do just wonder, like, what is that process like? And the second thing, and this is really sort of maybe more specific to Bryan and Audrey, is what is the status of IP at that point? If somebody came with their IP, you guys have made some investment in the process. I'd love to hear about sort of that. And maybe I'll start with Audrey this time.
All right. So stopping, right. It's, it's never going to be an easy discussion, but the idea, and I think Bryan mentioned it earlier, is you want to get there sooner rather than later. So you got to deal with the tough stuff first. And that's one of the reasons why we start with the risk assessment, and then we focus in on the areas that seem to have the highest risk. And we're going to deal with those first, so that even, if we started as a project, and maybe even if it comes into our second stage, so it made it past that first hurdle, but it doesn't pan out in the second stage, here are the reasons why, here's what we learned. Founder, you've been along for this, right? It's not like we've gone off and done this on our own. You've been involved. You saw how this was developing. Here's what we see at this point in time. And we don't think there's a path forward for whatever the reason is. Could be IP, could be the company won't be fundable, or it won't be fundable to the extent it needs to be fundable, or there's really not a market here, or there's not really a good payer model to work with in this medical space. So it could be any number of reasons, but here's what we learned. Here's how we got here. And we don't think we're the right fit for you. So you can choose to move ahead on your own. Your IP goes back to you or back to whoever had it. And you can start over, and you learn something. We all learned something, and, hopefully enjoyed the process and enjoyed working together. But never an easy conversation. But I think for everybody involved, it's better to get there sooner rather than later.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Tim, maybe you could go next.
So we haven't been at it as long as Bryan, but our point would be, hey, look, we have agreed upon milestones. We have a calendar that we're going through. We kind of all are on the same page in terms of learning what you have to have, right? So customers align with their jobs to be done, aligned to their values, aligned to the opportunity, aligned to the go-to-market strategy. So that is freely discussed with everybody, right? It's not Dial making the decision. Kind of, it's completely open with fellows and founders that we work with. So it almost feels like a joint decision. The nice thing is we're working on multiple opportunities at any one time with any cohort. So, and we're kind of jointly developing those. So if one idea kind of gets voted down, that doesn't mean that that particular individual is voted down, right? So there is a path forward in many cases, depending, because we want to launch successful companies. It just might not be the idea that they were kind of leaning toward. And in fact, I think I mentioned it beforehand, we'd rather them not come with ideas. We're going to develop those jointly. And so there's usually a path out for them, unless they completely drop the ball. Like Bryan said, they're just not performing, then that's a different story. That's a performance management issue. And hey, that's no different than if they had a corporate job.
Yeah, because in fact, they're employees at that point, right? The fellows are getting, as you pointed out, they're getting paid to be there, right? And you didn't do the job. Bryan, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think that what we try to do is really let data do the talking here. And we don't approach this like, hey, this means the end of your life or effort. What we really mean to say is, hey, what we're doing isn't working. It's not us who thinks this. Here's the data. What do you think? Right? And because if they come to the conclusion themselves that like, yeah, it's not working, usually the first effort is, what should we pivot? Because most of these businesses have to pivot 2 or 3 times to be successful anyway. So if we haven't found product market fit, then this is a pricing problem, it's a feature problem, it's a pain, it's a value proposition problem. So we can go back and really address those things and make tweaks and try again. If after a period of time, we've tried everything we can think of and we're now drawing blanks, I think at that point we're like, look, we've done all we can do. This is what the data are saying. Seems like it's time to move on. And then it's easy because they agree. I don't think I've ever had in my life a time when I've said, this is a disaster, and the person doing it says, no, it's fantastic. Well, I take that back. Faculty are sometimes the worst at this, right? It's their baby, and they think it's fantastic even when it's not. But usually most people are pretty reasonable when it comes to the data. So it's like, look, here's what the data are telling us. What do you want to do?
Yeah. And in your case, right, would it be the same as Audrey, the IP would just go back to wherever it came from, right?
Yeah, in fact, we don't, even as we do the development, the IP goes to, they purchase it, it's theirs. So whatever's in the company belongs to the company. We don't make claims to their intellectual property.
All right. Thanks. I think that's all really helpful from my viewpoint, anyway. So on a sort of a personal note, right? You are all 3 seasoned executives / entrepreneurs. You're all the real deal. That's my judgment anyway. You're all the real deal. I think anybody would say that who looked at it objectively, who looked at the data. They would say these people are the real deal. Somebody comes up to you and says, I want to be an entrepreneur. What is the first thing that you're going to tell them they need to do? Bryan.
I think this comes back to some things that Tim said earlier. I think we desperately want to find a psychological profile of an entrepreneur. And if they come in and say, I want to be an entrepreneur, I say fantastic, awesome. It's the way to build wealth. It's the way to build innovation. It's the way to build, if you're a builder, and really that's really where I go to is like, do you like to build things? Do you want to create stuff? Because that's really where entrepreneurship flourishes, I think. And so I'm like, great, what do you want to be? If they've got an idea they want to start on, if they don't, then I'd say, let's connect you to another group that is already working and you can start to dig in. But these are the kinds of people who aren't afraid to take the trash out. They're not afraid to, it's not about what's their job or not their job. So it's just matter, roll up your sleeves and come go to work with us. That's what I say to them. Roll up your sleeves, come go to work, prove yourself, come get a project, come make some process, come, make some progress, and let's go see what we can do.
Tim? See what I did to you there, Audrey?
What do I say? Usually, why? That's what I say, and they'll rise to the top pretty quickly, right? You can tell. And so, look, it's all around them, their motivation. Again, we're people first kind of. That's how we approach things. And so, there are a lot of people that fit an entrepreneurial profile from a personality point of view, but at the end of the day, it is their gut and their drive and their burning desire, right? So that'll come across pretty quickly in the first discussion. Then really, you're just kind of validating and verifying, and yeah, you're going to, and again, we're trying to make decisions early on no's, but as they go through the process, they're going to continue to rise to the top, and they're going to be successful entrepreneurs, with the right guidance and help and resources.
Audrey, what do you got for me?
So I would also ask why, and listen closely to the answer and base my next comments or suggestions on that. I mean, to me, it's like any other career dialogue kind of discussion that you have, and what makes you think it's a good fit. Do you have an understanding of what's involved? Have you walked in the footsteps, followed along, shadowed people, read stories? Like what's your understanding, and then how willing are you to do what it takes? It's not for the faint of heart. And you got to be ready for every single day to be different, and not just different, but fast paced, roll with the punches, figure out what to do, what not to do, and in an instant, over and over and over again. So I think that it's for someone who just wants it from the money standpoint, like almost any career decision, to follow just the money is probably not going to yield a happy solution or a happy spot, in the long run. I think my advice to people always is do what you love, do what makes you happy, and good things will happen. So
cool. So it's a little after 5:30. We're slotted to go till 6. For all of you people who are watching, if you have questions that you have not asked, now is the time to ask them, right? So put them in the Q&A. I've picked off about 11 questions out of Q&A that have peppered in here, and they've been really good pieces of helping to drive the narrative. While you're thinking of your questions and typing them in, I'm going to ask what may be my last question, which is, for all three of you, what did you come prepared to talk about that you thought I was going to ask you about, or that you thought was an important part of the narrative that never surfaced? Because I don't know everything, and that includes which questions to ask. So I'm going to go back to the traditional Tim, Audrey, Bryan for this one, and just is there any? You think of it as your summary statement. You can think of it as your parting shot. You can think of it as, a way to start a new piece of the conversation that we'll have over the next 20 minutes if you want to. Floor is yours, Tim.
So that's a lot of pressure, right? What is my summary statement? Look, so we want success. Okay. And so we're going to do everything we possibly can to help an entrepreneur be successful. And again, want to focus on the individuals and how they engage with us. We do that by assembling the right set of resources and interest groups around them. And that includes, you know, kind of our industry background and helping them through, you know, the whole sales process and success in launching their companies. So at the end of the day, we all succeed to the extent that they succeed. And so, you know, we don't look to vote people out or turn them down. We want to talk to as many people as we can that want to achieve success with us. And that's where we're at. So look, we're very approachable. We want to talk to you. We want to help you. And we think we have a structure to do that.
Cool. Thanks. Before Audrey answers the question or makes her summary statement or accuses me of something, whatever's going to happen next. Tim, there is a question that popped up in the chat, which had to do with whether or not a Dial Fellow salary is competitive with compensation from large companies.
For a large company?
That's what it literally said. Competitive with compensation from large companies.
So our particular example of the individual that just graduated, he is being paid less for Dial versus Deloitte, right? Not significantly less, to the extent that he, you know, said that this wasn't the right choice for him. Our model is not that much different than Stanford Biodesign or some of the other kind of long-term models that are fellowship oriented. We do provide, you know, kind of a package that looks good to most people. We actually provide housing when they come here, and they can use it to the extent that they want. We think it helps build camaraderie and kind of working together to have that place to land, right, when they come into West Lafayette. And so, you know, we're trying to make it easy for them. And that's kind of built together in the whole package that we offer.
Cool, thank you. All right, Audrey, now it's time for your, what did I not ask that I was supposed to, or what did you want to say that you need to have time to, or whatever you want to say, it's up to you.
Well, I think what I would cover is, you know, Boomerang started in Indiana for a bunch of reasons, but Indiana, primarily because Indiana is this unique place with a lot of healthcare industry, a lot of talent that kind of grew up working for companies that are based in Indiana, gained experience in these areas. And you know, sometimes that talent and the company part ways, or company, you know, they end up in Indiana with a lot of great experience and maybe some great ideas. And we saw a real opportunity in putting Boomerang in Indiana, in the heart of Indiana at 16 Tech, to you know, to provide some great opportunities for new ideas to come to life and to benefit the state, the economics of the state, the population of the state, and hopefully the population of the country and the world in terms of new healthcare solutions. So yeah, that's really why we're here. And it's some of the funnest times for me with the company are when, you know, we get this positive energy building about an idea that has come to us that we just all really like and think it's a great fit and that it's a great solution and it's the right time for it. And so, you know, some of that's very instinctive and some of it's methodical, and bringing the two together is, I think, where the magic happens.
Cool, thanks. Bryan?
One of the things we touched on a little bit, but I thought maybe we talk a little bit more about was just how do these teams acquire talent? We're in a very talent poor environment, poor meaning constrained. The talent is super capable, it's just not a lot of it that you need. And so that typically becomes a huge burden or barrier for a lot of these companies that are going, how to find talent. And it plays on a lot of the things that Tim pays people to come in and work, which is, I think, a way to get the talent, right? I mean, it's a way to bridge the gap, especially when you've got a lot of if you've got a lot of risk and some things that are making it challenging. So this is one of the things that venture studios, I think, have to think about. And for a while, the venture studio is actually taking on those roles, right, of talent. But talent needs to be something that they connect to as quickly as they can. So building out those networks and making that possible to find the right talent in the right places and get that engaged is a serious challenge, and one that we're trying to address, not always successfully, but something that I think is important. But ultimately, I think this model of venture studio fills a very important niche in a way that I don't think accelerators or incubators really do well. It doesn't mean that an incubator or accelerator isn't the right way to go for certain companies, but in many cases, I love the way that Tim said this, right? Just why run into the wall if you don't have to? And they can help you figure out how not to do that, not just connect you with the right people, but connect you with the right processes and the right systems. So I'm really bullish on what this might look like in the future as these go forward.
Yeah. I don't have any more questions, and there are no more questions in the Q&A. But I personally want to say thank you so much to the three of you for being here with us today, because I've learned a whole bunch of things. And, for the first year of COVID, I interviewed people every Friday morning on a Facebook show for an hour at a time. And I ended up with this riff where I started telling people the only reason I did it was so I could learn something. And so this is like a trifold for me. This is great, right? So I got to learn from all three of you, both about what you're doing with the venture studios, but also some new ways of thinking about some things. I hope for all the rest of you out there watching that this was helpful to you, right? If maybe engagement with a venture studio is in your future. Maybe you have a thing that you'd like to see if it could be commercialized through a venture studio. Maybe you are a person who wants to be an entrepreneur and you want to engage with one of the venture studios about being involved in a team, becoming a fellow, whatever. If you're here at this webinar, you must have had an interest in doing something around startups, right? There's at least 4 different places that you can plug in, represented right here, plus the John Martinson Center at the College of Engineering. So connect. And let's see if we can all build something better together. All right. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.